Hey guys, how are you doing? I wish we would have been able to be all together at Jesus to the Nations this year. But for all of our own safety and for the safety of others, we are staying home because of coronavirus. I am here in quarantine in my home down here in Brazil. But I wanted to share with all of you a little bit about what we are learning as a media ministry that works with unreached people groups. We have evolved in even what we're learning through how to operate reaching the least reached people groups in the world. 42% of the world population, according to the Joshua Project, is still unreached. The vast majority of that is within the 1040 window here. 42% of the world population still lives within unreached people groups. And our goal as a ministry is to focus exclusively on creating media content for audiences in those regions. Not creating media content about those regions necessarily, but film content that takes stories from those regions and gives it to their own audiences. One thing we discovered while doing the research is that roughly only 1% of the global missions budget, so not the church budget, but the budget of the church that is spent on missions, which is roughly 10% of the church budget, of that 10%, only 1% goes towards reaching the unreached. And roughly only 3% of missionaries. And so how is it that we as a church are going to effectively reach the unreached when such a small budget is going towards it? And we began looking at things, and there are very legitimate barriers why we haven't reached it yet. Obviously, it's pretty easy to get into many other regions of the world. Latin America, where I am here in Brazil, missions has already been here for a long time. There's many denominations, churches. You can go to every 300 meters almost as a church. And the strategies that we as a global church use to reach many areas that are reached maybe, and even probably, are not going to work within the last 42%. And so one thing that we've been doing as a ministry is researching how can we change our strategies. Do we need to adapt our strategies that we used in the reached areas, or how do we go about that? And I want to share with you something that we've been learning specifically over the last couple of years that's really transformed the way we look at doing media, specifically as a media ministry, and something that we're continuing to learn. I just got back from the Middle East a few weeks ago, and it is amazing to see when you start actually listening to the churches and ministries who are there, how oftentimes our Western point of view just doesn't communicate with them, or just the strategies that often we times have. Oftentimes, when thinking and listening to their strategies, they come up really short. This is something that I'm learning. And so one thing that we sat down with one pastor, and he's from a large church in the Middle East. And the first thing that we asked him was just like, what are you doing? How can we help? And his eyes just looked at us. He's like, I've never heard that. He's met with a lot of North American ministries. He's like, that's something that we rarely hear as, a church. Most missionaries and most missions agencies, when they come to our country and come to our church, they say, we have this, we would like you to use it. Or we would like to translate this into your language. Or we would like to give you training. And he looked at us, he's like, sure, training in itself is not bad, but we don't need necessarily more theological training. I have a PhD in theology. We have our own seminaries which are doing quite well. And obviously, we're not talking about a remote area. We're talking about an urban area. And he's like, oftentimes so many North American or Western missions agencies come and they try to bring their strategy and say, hey, you need this. And they look at it and it's a completely North Americanized strategy, or sometimes it's a North American strategy tried to be adapted to fit with theirs. And he's like, in his mind, he doesn't say this, he's like, that's not what we need. Those don't meet the needs of our culture and where we are at. And he thanked us when he said, thank you for just listening to what our needs are. And so that's one thing that we've been doing when we sit down and try to make partnerships with people in other countries, is coming first and saying, what are you guys doing? What are your needs? And what is the best way to reach your people? And it's not that we as a Western missions organization don't have something that we can't contribute. I'm sure we do. God has put his image in everyone that is part of his church and everyone in the world. And we as a church from the West have things we can contribute to help. But one thing that really opens doors in doing ministry in this region of the world is asking, what do you need? What is the strategy that works? And seeing where we can come along to support the strategy that they have. And maybe we can help them tweak it to make it better. Maybe we can help them take it to a new level. But coming alongside and doing that. So one thing that we are doing with film and that we're really pumped about with film is moving away from the idea of dubbing North American projects into these languages, Arabic, Farsi, Turkish, Indonesian, whatever the language may be. And coming along and finding the local ministries and asking them, what are the most powerful stories from your culture that we can tell? And what is the best way to tell that story? Can we support you telling that story? We can bring, and this is what our goal is as a ministry, we can bring things like a good, healthy budget, like they spend in North American productions. We can bring a healthy budget. We'll raise the funds for that. We can bring good cinematographers and good cinematography, high quality video. But we would like the story to be molded and guided by you guys. And you guys choose the story. You guys choose the strategy. And obviously we are going to help in that process. But how can we support you guys as local production ministries? One thing we found, for instance, is many production ministries in many parts of the world, they do not have the liberty to talk about certain stories. In many areas in the Middle East, if they were to talk about Muslims coming to Christ, they could face very, very real persecution, whether it's being thrown in prison or being physically injured or killed. And so there's many ministries working in these countries, and oftentimes what they don't need is more training. You'd be surprised. We as a ministry, we're even surprised going to different regions of the world. Many Christian ministries in the church in Asia and in the Middle East, they are just as well equipped with talent and technology as the United States is. For those of you who are from media backgrounds, we go to and there's Christian ministries on the ground using top-of-the-line equipment, Red, Arri, Blackmagic, all these big names for who's into the film world. They're using them and they can use them, but maybe what they can't do, and this is one thing we found out, they cannot produce certain stories because if they did, they would be severely persecuted. And so one of the ideas that we're thinking out as a ministry is, okay, we can help you produce those stories, because what we can do is we can go on the ground, we can co-produce these stories with you. But when we're talking about who's the maybe some dialogue that's dangerous, or maybe there's some scenes that are dangerous, we'll produce these in a third country. We'll produce these in Brazil or the USA or Canada or Nicaragua or wherever we can produce it, that it's not dangerous to produce. And we can produce the film that you want to produce in your country, but we'll produce it over here. We'll put our name on it or some other name on this production, so it doesn't have any connection back to you in your country. And we can basically make this pseudo production using VFX or whatever we need to do, high quality level, and then give it back to you, and it doesn't have your fingerprints on it. And it wasn't produced in your country. Maybe some scenes were, but the dangerous stuff wasn't. And the authorities in your country have no idea where this film was produced that looks like it was produced in your country. And so that was one way that we as a media ministry found that we can support different ministries. Also, there's many other productions that do not have a nature that would be dangerous to produce. And we can support them, giving them, working with helping raise a budget for the projects that they want to do, helping bring, if they don't have maybe the professional crew, we can help bring certain crew people, but letting them tell their story that they know is going to reach their audience. And that's the biggest thing that we've seen in the Middle East and different regions, is they have great strategies. They have fantastic strategies that will blow our Western minds away. And sometimes we just have to stop and listen and hear, what are your strategies? Because maybe we can come and help springboard those strategies to go even farther and support the work that they are doing, rather than coming with all of our baggage and all of our strategies that we developed here in Sao Paulo or in Dallas or New York or Toronto or London, and coming over and basically saying, here's the strategy, we want to train you to use this strategy. And what we've been hearing from a lot of different people is just, we want people to listen to what the real needs are. And so my challenge here in this session to anybody, whether you're a media ministry or not, is when you're working with unreached people groups and anybody from another culture, stop and listen and ask them, what is their strategy? And come along and support them. And maybe instead of us jumping as a North American ministry and going to all the small people groups, go to the main cultural center, find the ministries that are already in that region, ask them what's the best way to reach the smaller people groups. Come along and support their ministry in a partnership to reach those people groups. And so that's what we've been learning as a ministry. And if you are interested in film production, if you're interested in media, I would love to just chat with you. I would love, here my email is marcelo@lightinAction.org. If you're more interested in what Light in Action is doing in film production, we're working on different productions, narrative productions, short film, in the future perhaps feature film. In the unreached world, our goal is to reach the 7 least reached regions of the world with high quality films in their own languages, not necessarily dubbed, but produced in their own languages with their own actors. And through this, get people interested into the gospel, get interested in the gospel. Develop a thirst for knowing the truth through pre-evangelistic films, and then also through high-quality evangelistic materials, whether it's media or otherwise, getting people connected with local churches in these regions. The church around the world, God has given amazing gifts to the church in these regions, in the unreached world. And I think the new wave of missions is coming alongside as a Western church and saying, how can we help you guys do what you already know how to do? And so that's one thing that I'm personally learning, and I would love to challenge all of you who are interested in missions. When you come to a new area, stop and listen. And just truly listen. Try to understand what are their needs. Ask them, what is the best way to reach your people? What works? Because, and I've talked to people with big ministries who have good budgets, who have very good strategists thinking about strategies of how to reach the world. And I've seen them come to their knees in different areas of the world where they've come all prepared to train someone to do something. They get there and they're just like, our strategy and our big idea that made sense when we were over in the United States, it just doesn't make sense here. It just doesn't work. There's so many different misconceptions that we had about this culture. And so, come alongside, listen, and then find out how you can bring to the table something that will really support what is going on in these regions. And so that's what we've been learning. May God use his church in North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, to bring people into a relationship with him. Coronavirus, we do not need to panic about it. God let coronavirus come here on earth, and he can use this time to bring us together, to stop and think and look and listen. And so I believe it's going to be a good time for us as a church and as people working in missions to stop and really analyze what are our strategies. How are we doing partnerships? And my personal challenge is to get you, if you're not thinking about it, to start thinking about the last 42% of the world, because there's a lot of people there and they're dying without having ever heard of Jesus Christ. And so anyways, may God bless his church. And if you want to check out some of our videos, I'll put some links here at the end so that you can check them out. And we are now working on a film in Arabic. And so if you want to have updates about that, please let me know. Send an email to marcelo@lightinAction.org and I can stick you on our update list, or just chat with you about any subject in relation to unreached people groups or film production. Thanks a lot. God bless.
Tetelestai has the goal of actually going from Genesis to the risen Christ, taking the key stories and not only telling them and showing them on screen, but actually we teach through them. We see what are the main Bible truths that come out of these stories.
The basis of the series was always a Bible study. And so the style of the series is more documentary. There's 2 teachers or presenters who are teaching through the Bible, and then there's biblical scenes that accompany those to show in a cinematic way what's being explained, what's being talked about. And it not only illustrates the points and helps people understand what's being taught, but it's also just beautiful to watch.
Matthew records that all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us.
It's very much focused on Bible teaching, not necessarily a movie story. So the story is not carried along by the actors, the story is carried along by the teachers. And it's a way that you can actually get a little bit more in depth with some of the material, more in depth than you could in just a narrative film.
Here in Brazil, for instance, 9 out of every 10 people would say that they believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for their sins. 9 out of every 10 people in Brazil would say that. However, I doubt that 2 or 3 of those actually understands what Jesus Christ actually did on the cross and understands true saving grace. And so it's not necessary for a lack of, in all situations, preaching Christ, but maybe it's a lack for actually making his gospel known. And so the goal of Tetelestai is to be very clear in its presentation of the gospel.
Barabbas was a murderer and a lawbreaker. Yet Jesus was the perfect Son of God. Barabbas was guilty and deserved to be condemned. Yet Jesus was innocent and deserved to be released. Yet on that day, it was the guilty one who was released. The guilty one was set free and given life, because an innocent one was condemned and sentenced to death. You see, as being the prisoner set free, Barabbas unknowingly represented you and represented me, because you and I are also lawbreakers. We have broken God's holy laws. We are guilty and condemned. Yet Jesus had come in order to take our condemnation, that we might be set free. Jesus had come to die so that we might live.
Tetelestai, the eternal story of redemption. I truly believe I understood the scriptures so much better and so much more, even after going through seminary and everything, by watching this series. It can happen to you too. Check it out.